When the curlew return in the spring, it's like, you know, spring's arrived. A fabulous thing.
We've had curlew here twice. I thought that was brilliant. They were one of the most popular birds in Ireland before my time, and I'd never heard them. The sound of it's fascinating.
That's the one.
The curlew is Europe's largest wading bird, famous for its bubbling call. However, the Eurasian curlew is on the red list as near threatened globally. The picture is even worse at a European level, where they're listed as threatened. The UK hosts around a quarter of the world's breeding curlews, so this is a hugely important place for them. But they are in steep decline here. Since the mid-1990s, we've lost nearly half, 48%, of our breeding curlews. They will be lost altogether unless there is urgent action. The main reason for their decline is that not enough chicks are surviving through to fledgling. This is due to changes over the years on their breeding grounds, such as suitable habitat being lost or becoming more fragmented, along with pressures from predation and development. Curlews come inland to breed in the spring. They rely largely on farmland, mainly in the uplands but also in lowland areas. Farmers have a key role to play in helping to reverse the decline of curlews by giving them the kind of habitat they need to nest and raise their chicks. In this film, we'll look at some of the most important things that farmers can do to help curlews, with a particular focus on upland farms and marginal farmed land. When it comes to helping curlews to breed successfully on your land, the most important things you can do are managing vegetation with curlews in mind, having wet areas, disturbing the curlews as little as possible, making your farm less attractive to predators. How you go about this will vary depending on the kind of landscape you're farming in. Curlews tend to choose boggy, rushy areas to breed in. Managing rush is key. That'll generally be a combination of topping and grazing, which can be challenging in very wet areas. Topping rushes. Curlews require a tussocky but open structure to the vegetation that offers enough height and complexity to conceal a nest, but also the openness to allow movement. The aim of rush cutting for curlews is to prevent rush from becoming too dense, but not removing it altogether. As a general rule, if half or more of a field is covered in rush, cutting may be beneficial to maintain an open structure.
So when managing rush for breeding waders, the key thing that we're trying to do really is to create a varied sward structure. In areas of dense, soft rush, what we would generally do is just cut all of that rush. In areas where the rush is less dense, or if you've got different species of rush, then we can cut a bit more selectively. By creating this varied sward structure, that enables the curlew to have places to nest and to hide their chicks from predators, and also having the more open areas for feeding.
For rush topping in really wet areas, it might be necessary to use a tracked vehicle, like a tractor with a SUSI track system. Thanks to funding through the Curlew Life project, the RSPB was able to help with this on some farms.
So in the past, I've had contractors come in and get the rush, but they're only getting so far. They're not getting down. We're on the fenland at the bottom, where you're not really on terra firma. Whereas RSPB's tractor was here 2 years ago and they basically covered it all. They did a great job. So getting the RSPB out to get the rush cut this time of the year, it's benefiting me and the farm, and it's benefiting the waders.
But mae brwyn yn mynd yn bach yn rhy dew, fel bod y gylfingir a'r anifeiliaid yn methu mynd trwyddo fo. Mae'n job dda dorio, os di bosib. Mae'n bwysig gadael ynysodd o frwyn yma acw. Byddwn ni yn defnyddio brwyn weithiau fel reid o dan yr anifeiliaid sy'n cael ei cadw dan do yn y gia. Ond mae'n stwff da, mae'n ddim i ddechrau. Diolch yn tueddu o sticio yn y glân mor ddrwg na gwell. Dwi'n defnyddio yn yr rhac yn heddiw i reid defed fewn i gael cnifio.
Grazing. Grazing with cattle is particularly good for creating the kind of mixed sward that curlews need. Grazing at the appropriate density is key, along with the type and breed of livestock, with hardier breeds of cattle tending to be better for this type of grazing.
We use a farm primarily for these cattle here, which are red poll. They're very good regenerative cattle, so that they'll eat certain grasses that other cattle won't, or sheep won't especially. Their footprints will leave little divots and holes, either to encourage insects and worms and things to come through. Their dung will produce other insects that are interested in feeding on dung, which again provides another meal for the curlew. We're trying to create spaces between especially rushes so young chick curlew can wander around safely. When the cattle move off one field, we'll give them the field at least 2 or 3 weeks break, and then sheep will come on in small numbers. The same 10-acre field that had 3 cattle on it will then probably have 6 to 10 sheep on it. Make sure that it's never intensive, so there's enough clear areas and that nesting won't be disturbed by numbers basically.
Keeping disturbance to a minimum. Curlews are vulnerable to disturbance from farm operations when they are nesting and when they have young chicks.
We cut silage for the cows in the winter. We cut the fields late after the 28th of July, which is when the curlew have all left by then. A lot of farms wouldn't need to adjust such a lot to make the habitat a lot better for curlew. A little bit of late silaging, a little bit of thought, or even look where the nests are and go around them. Some people do that and it's quite successful. You know, a lot of silage is taken really early and then people have to add straw to it to make it not as good. Could just take it a little bit later and give the curlews a chance. We don't do anything with anything from the second that the curlew come back. So we'll never travel on any of the ground, even where they are, if we can help it. And if we can remove stock from where they are, then we'll try and do that as well. The curlew on our own farm, since we've been working with the RSPB, have increased. So it's good.
Managing scrub. It's not recommended to remove trees and scrub without seeking advice. They can be very valuable for other wildlife and may be an important feature of a landscape.
Scrub removal is going to help grounding nesting birds like lapwing and curlew because they want to be able to see around them, particularly for foxes and other predators. They want to be able to see and ward off what's coming. They're not stupid. They know that a crow will sit in a tree and wait for them to get off their nest.
Creating wet areas. In general, restoring the natural hydrology on the land and re-wetting areas where curlews breed is very helpful for them. For example, where the land's been drained in the past. In some places, scrapes could be created, but this should be looked at in the context of the wider hydrology.
Mae'r gylfeinir a nifer o adar eraill yn bwydo trwy gollwng a gwthio I ffug hir I mewn i'r pridd I fita pryfid genwair a gwahanol bethau. Felly, drwy gael y mawndir a'r tir yn lypach ac yn mwy meddal, mae'n haws iddi bwydo. A mae hyn yn arbennig o bwysig pe mae efo'i chiwion yn yr ucheldir. Mae'r ciwion yn deor ar ôl I gori nhw'n 4 wythnos. Maen nhw'n dod allan o'r wyau a maen nhw wrthi wedyn yn bwydo'u hunain yn y glaswelltir a'r mawndir o'i cwmpas nhw. Mae'r ciwion yn fach iawn a mae pig nhw hefyd yn fach. Felly, yn yr wythnosau cyntaf, maen nhw angen bita pryfetach sydd ar wyneb y tir. Ond wrth i'w pig nhw hefyd dyfu'n hirach, maen nhw'n gallu bwydo I lawr yn y pridd.
Re-wetting.
Ger y ffarm hon, maen nhw wedi bod yn gwella'r cynefin trwy ail-lychu y mawndir a cau y ffosydd cafodd ei gosod yn y mawndir rhai blynyddoedd yn ôl i'w sychio. Y bwriad ydy, drwy gymryd talpiau fawn I roi nhw yn y ffosydd a'i cryfhau nhw, mae'n creu system o argau bychain sydd yn arafu llif y dŵr ac yn creu pyllau bach. A mae hynny'n neud 2 beth. Mae'n golygu fod y tir yn lypach am fwy o'r flwyddyn. Mae'r gwaith I ail-lychu y mawn yn arbennig o bwysig yn ystod y tymor nythu. Wrth wella ansawdd y tir, bod o'n haws yn ei fwydo a bod yna fwy o brofetach. Pan mae'r ciwion yn fach, mae'r iar a ceiliod yn ei gwachod nhw wrth gwrs. Ac os does yna ddim ddigon o fwyd mewn un lle, mae rhieni wedyn yn ei harwain nhw I ardaloedd newydd I fwydo. Os dyn ni'n gallu gwella'r cynefin mewn ardal, mae'n golygu dydyn nhw ddim wedyn yn gofod teithio mor bell, a mae'n llai o beryg wedyn iddyn nhw gael eu bwyta gen llwydogod, brain ac anifeiliaid eraill. Mae'r ffaith bod y mang wedi awlychu'n golygu bod o'n dal y dŵr yn ôl yn hirach sydd o fydd i'r tir ei hun, i'r stoc a hefyd i unrhyw greaduriaid eraill sy'n byw yna.
Digging scrapes. Digging scrapes is another way to provide wet areas for curlews. These are pools that may gradually dry up over the summer, continuously providing muddy areas full of invertebrates for curlews to feed on. Make sure your scrape isn't the same depth across all of it. Have humps and hollows to create niches for plants and animals. The deepest area should be around 50 centimetres. Have a low gradient slope at the sides so the birds can reach the water's edge easily. It's important to manage the vegetation around the edges of the scrape. Grazing can help to keep the edges open and muddy, stopping vegetation from taking over. This reduces the need for ongoing management by machinery. Alternatively, you may need to mow or clear out with a digger each year. Predation management. If you are considering how to manage and reduce predation on your farm, the most important initial consideration is making sure that the habitat is as good as it can be for breeding curlew. Predator management is likely to be much more effective if it is done alongside measures to provide suitable breeding habitat, as featured in this film. It should not be undertaken without these crucial interventions. Getting the habitat right may also reduce predation risk. For example, managing vegetation will help curlew chicks to stay hidden from predators, whilst providing wet areas means they won't have to travel as far to find food, which can expose them to predators. Targeted scrub removal can reduce vantage points and places for predators to hide. There are also steps you can take to make your farm less attractive to predators. One way is to limit the amount of food available to predators. For example, using enclosed feeders for livestock to reduce the number of corvids, and removing afterbirth and dead livestock as quickly as possible. You can also make it more difficult for ground predators to move around the farm. They will often follow linear features, such as fences, tracks and walls, so try to keep these to a minimum. A number of curlew recovery projects around the UK have used temporary nest fencing to minimise the risk of nests and eggs being predated by mammals. In some areas, this has been highly effective in increasing hatching rates, alongside habitat management. However, because nest fencing disturbs birds during nesting, it is important to seek advice and follow best practice before implementing it. If you are considering predator control, this should be informed, targeted, and done at an appropriate scale and intensity. It should also be in line with legal regulations and should follow best practice in welfare standards. Where undertaken, control of foxes and crows should be in combination with measures to reduce the underlying drivers of high predation pressure, or at the very least, not contribute to those drivers. It is also important, where possible, to monitor the effectiveness of any management you undertake to support curlew breeding on your farm. Maintaining good soil. Applying farmyard manure, liming and maintaining good soil structure can boost worms and other soil life on farmland, providing food for curlew. Earthworms are sensitive to soil acidity. Around pH 5.5 is ideal for them. Consult with your local agriculture and environment authorities in case permission is needed for actions like liming. The bird's eye view. When it comes to turning around the curlew's fortunes, farmers have a critical role to play. Having effective, adequately funded agri-environment schemes that are well supported by advice in each of the 4 countries of the UK is essential to this. Of course, farming is one part of a much bigger picture, albeit a very important part. UK governments need to safeguard key breeding and wintering grounds by designating them as a network of protected areas for curlews, known as Special Protection Areas or SPAs. Future woodland planting and other types of development must be done sensitively to prevent curlew habitat from becoming more fragmented. And the restoration of peatlands can help curlews and the climate crisis. It's going to take a collective effort from governments, organisations and people, focusing on everything from policy and habitat management to science and public engagement. But together, there's still time to save curlew. Getting support. There are a range of organisations working on the recovery of curlews and other species who may be able to offer advice and support depending on your location. For example, the RSPB, the Nature Friendly Farming Network and local wildlife trusts, to name a few.
Mae'n bosib bod yna arian ar gael unau trwy cynlluniau amaethyddol neu amgylcheddol i chi wneud gwaith tebyg i hyn eich hunain. Mae werth i chi sôn wrth eich adran amaethyddol chi yn eich gwlad chi.
We are optimistic that with the right support for farmers and other landowners to put in place the measures that will help Curlew to thrive, we can see a recovery in the population.
Visit the Curlew Life website for more information.